The following is the story of Napoleon's Bonapartist palace, a Napoleonic version of Man in the High Castle, and how the French century came to be. Our story begins on December 2nd, 1804, when Napoleon was crowned Emperor of France. This is where Napoleon claims to be the successor of Charlemagne's Frankish Empire from a millennia ago. This puts him on the same level as the Austrian Empire and the Russian Empire in terms of titles and stuff. About 4 months later, in April 1805, many nations such as Austria and Russia joined Britain against France, truly starting the War of the Third Coalition. Later in August of that same year, the Battle of Trafalgar happens. Admiral Nelson decides that, you know what, we shouldn't go straight through the Franco-Spanish fleet. It decides to do the traditional sideways strategy thing, resulting in a British defeat in the Battle of Trafalgar, setting the stage for the Napoleonic invasion of Britain. A month later, in November, after convincing Bavaria to join France's side in the Napoleonic Wars, they commit to an invasion of Austria, going straight for Vienna and managing to make the Austrians surrender, seizing Dalmatia, and giving Austria's Italian territories to France's client states. Later, as the months go by, France conquers Naples, puppeting it and creating the Confederation of the Rhine, a French puppet state. This makes Prussia feel threatened by the increasing Napoleonic power in Europe, causing it to break its neutrality, causing the War of the Fourth Coalition to ensue. But Prussia gets absolutely cooked by Napoleonic forces, causing Prussia to retreat all the way to the Russian border. At the same time, the Ottomans joined the Napoleonic side in order to defeat Russia, causing the millionth Russo-Turkish War. Due to more open Napoleonic support, the Ottomans managed to push back the Russians, temporarily occupying Crimea, causing Russia to switch sides over to the Napoleonic side. Back in Germany, after being defeated by the French, Prussia's land gets halved, with its lost territories going to client states like the Duchy of Warsaw and the Confederation of the Rhine. Later in 1808, Russia decides to commit an invasion of Finland. Due to support from the French, the Swedish are defeated by the Russian forces, causing Finland to be annexed into the Russian Empire. During all of this, Napoleon decides to create the continental system between France, its puppet states, Spain, Austria, Prussia, Russia, Sweden, the Ottoman Empire, and Denmark, Norway. In order to cripple British economic power, Portugal decides to not abide by Napoleon's continental system, remaining loyal to its glorious king, Britain, resulting in a Franco-Spanish invasion of Portugal. All is going well for the French Empire. You got all of continental Europe under its thumb, and you created an economic bloc which would cause the economic downfall of the British Empire. That is, until Russia and to a lesser extent Spain restarts their trade with Britain, angering Napoleon I. This will later result in secret French war plans for Britain, Spain, and Russia. The French are debating on whether to strike Britain, Spain, or Russia first. Some say Spain because they're the weakest of the bunch and knocking them out first will be easy. Others say Russia because they're the one doing the most trading with Britain, so why not just knock them out? While others say Britain because they have been a pain in Napoleon's ass ever since the beginning, and just knocking them out will probably defeat the entire coalition. Eventually, the French cook up a plan. Britain first, Spain second, Russia last. Later, Napoleon decides to invade the British Isles, sponsoring Irish and Scottish rebellions all over the Isles, causing the War of the Fifth Coalition to ensue. Due to the successful Irish and Scottish rebellions, this will make France only being focused on the English, capturing Cornwall and many other southern territories from England. Moving on to the East Indies, the French capture British and Dutch colonies there, making Britain lose their biggest moneymaker, India. This would severely cripple the British economy, causing it to not have enough money to fund its army and navy against the Napoleonic forces in the British Isles, resulting in an English capitulation. Ireland and Scotland will be created as French puppet kingdoms, with one of Napoleon's relatives becoming the King of Ireland, and the Stuart dynasty, more commonly known as the Jacobites, being restored in Scotland. Napoleon would take the chance to weaken his enemy by crowning himself the King of England. This would cause the British government to flee to Australia and New Zealand. Later at springtime, Napoleon commits to an invasion of the Iberian Peninsula. Due to Spain and Portugal losing their biggest ally, Britain, they would have zero chance against the Napoleonic forces, and due to them being politically and diplomatically isolated from the rest of the world, this would result in an easy, quick Napoleonic victory. The Iberian Peninsula would be united, but it would be under Joseph Bonaparte, Napoleon's younger brother, and Catalonia and Andorra would be annexed into the Empire of France. Later in the summertime, Napoleon commits to its biggest high-risk, high-reward invasion of Russia. But before he does that though, he struck deals with many of his eastern allies, promising Prussian control over the southern Baltics, Swedish control over Finland and the northern Baltics, Austrian control over Ukraine, and Ottoman control of the Black Sea coast from Russia. Finally, after giving his allies a reason to invade Russia, the high-risk, high-reward invasion of Russia ensues. Since Britain isn't there to support Russia anymore, the Russians would be screwed under the Napoleonic forces, causing many victories in the West. This would cause protests, demonstrations, and full-blown rebellions against the Russian Empire. You might think that this wouldn't be a big deal to the Russian Tsar, but you would be wrong. You see, Russia at the time was an absolute monarchy, and that means if something goes wrong in your country, you, the absolute monarch, will be blamed for it. And since Alexander the First of Russia was ruling like an absolute monarch, that means he would get blamed for all of their losses against Napoleon, leading to the Republican Russian Revolution against the Tsarist government a century earlier than our own timeline. Tsar Alexander the First would try to flee Russia, but he would end up getting shot by one of his military officers, installing a Republican provisional government in Russia. But these motherfuckers decided that, hey, maybe if we stop attacking the French, they won't attack us, and they maybe will invade Austria or something, and they agreed. Yeah, that plan went horribly, so the Russians would be forced to sue for peace. The Baltics will be divided between Prussia and Sweden. Austria will puppet Ukraine, and the Ottomans would regain control over the Black Sea coast of Russia, including Crimea. Later, as the years go by, Russia devolves into a warlord-like era, with many local nobilities and military officers governing their local regions, causing Russia to be fragmented. Austria decided it would be a good idea for them to rebel against Napoleonic control over Europe. Yeah, that was a mistake. With Hungary gaining independence under French protection, Galicia would be partitioned between the Duchy of Warsaw and Ukraine, with Ukraine now being under French protection. A few years later, in 1815, Napoleon decides to invade the Ottoman Empire just in case they try to rebel against Napoleonic control over Europe, sponsoring Slavic, Greek, and Egyptian rebellions all over the Ottoman Empire. Algiers will be seized by the French, while Egypt will gain control over Syria and much of the Arabian Peninsula. The Ottoman Balkans would be seized by revolutionaries, and Kurdistan will also rebel against the Ottoman Empire. Later, Napoleon would enter Constantinople, forcing the Sultan to surrender under the might of the Napoleonic Empire. Meanwhile, while all of this was happening, due to Britain now being weakened, the United States takes advantage of this and invading Canada and also Alaska too, quickly annexing both of those regions. Now, I'm going to discuss to you all the changes that have occurred during the Napoleonic Wars, going from west to east. Starting in North America, America annexes Canada and Alaska. Moving on to the Iberian Peninsula, Iberia is united but under Joseph Bonaparte, and Catalonia is annexed into France. Ireland, Scotland, and England are now French puppets, with Ireland being under a Bonapartist king, Scotland being under the Jacobites, and England being under a personal union with France. Moving on to Germany, Prussia and Austria would lose lands to the Confederation of the Rhine, with Austria being partitioned between the Napoleonic powers, with Hungary gaining independence, Galicia being partitioned between Warsaw and Ukraine, and the remainder of the Austrian Empire going to the Confederation of the Rhine. Moving on to the Balkans, the Romanian principalities would be under Hungarian protection, Serbia, Bulgaria, and Greece would gain independence under French protection, Egypt would also gain independence but also under French protection, Algiers would be annexed as a French colony, with Tunis and Tripoli being French protectorates. Kurdistan would also gain independence, also being under French protection. Britain, Spain, and Portugal fleeing to their colonies as governments in exile, planning on retaking their lost lands. And finally, the best for last, the remainder of the Ottoman Empire would now be the Ottoman state under heavy French supervision, and Constantinople and the surrounding areas would be annexed into the French Empire, with Napoleon declaring the United Napoleonic Empire of Europe due to his mass influence all over the continent. But three questions would rise up. Would Spain, Portugal, and Britain be able to retake their lost lands? Number two, would Russia ever recover from the warlord era? And number three, the most important of them all, when Napoleon dies, would there be a smooth transition of power, or will Europe break out into a large-scale civil war? Stay tuned, because I'm turning this scenario right here into a multi-episode series called Project Bonapartist, where we explore the consequences of Napoleon winning the Napoleonic Wars. So make sure to like and subscribe with all notifications on if you want to see episode 2. This has been Awesome History, and adios, amigos!